Welcome. Welcome to Taking the Tradition On. First online talk show of its kind as far as I know. And a big shout out to all my Taking the Tradition On patrons. You know who you are. You're completely brilliant and wonderful. And I couldn't do this really without you. So thank you for all of your support. And yes, if you would like to become a patron, please feel free to join us, but there is no pressure at all. So, taking the tradition on, there's a few new people here. Taking the tradition on is about taking the tradition on. It's an in conversation for about an hour. There might be stories and poems within that hour of conversation, but it's a chance to meet a fabulous artist, to find out what inspires them, to find out more about their life and what makes them tick, why they tell the stories that they do. It's not a storytelling performance. So if you come for a storytelling performance, don't be here kind of 20 minutes in going, when are the stories starting? Though you will have chance to hear my fabulous guest on Thursday, because she's going to be telling at the Get a Word in Edgeways concert. So you can always join her there. You've only got to wait a couple of days, and we might sneak the odd story or poem in tonight. So we'll be going for about an hour. I will try and keep an eye on the chat. There's all sorts of lovely things going on in there. And a lovely, lovely international audience tonight. So from Kenya to Cumbria. Yes, Morocco was fantastic. So we've got Morocco to Maryland in. Shane's outside listening by the fire, which sounds rather idyllic. So we're going to be sat here talking for about an hour, and there will be chance for a Q&A at the end. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat. If question comes in and we're in the flow, I might not say anything, and I'm happy for people to have side conversations there. That's fine. But if you have a burning question that you desperately want to have answered, go to the Q&A, which is down the bottom here somewhere, hopefully on most devices, and I will look at that at the end. Me and Philippa will look at that together, and we will do our best to answer the questions there at the end, but we might park them for a little bit if they don't fit in with the flow. So there we go. I think we've got most of the stuff that I need to say. Just to say that, yeah, it's an amazing thing taking the tradition on. Every time I get more and more amazed. So we are now amazingly in our third series. We Are What We Tell. And all of the conversations are up on YouTube. They're all archived there. So my last couple of conversations were with Zuhair Kaznari from Morocco. He's one of the driving forces behind the Marrakesh International Storytelling Festival. And Tamar Eleanor Williams, who is a bilingual Welsh storyteller. And that conversation is a really moving and eloquent talk mostly about minority language, particularly Welsh. So every evening is very, very different, and every evening gives a window into a different place in the world and a different style of life and a different approach to storytelling. And tonight is going to be no different. So we got as far as North Africa with Zuhair, and tonight we're going to reach out into sub-Saharan Africa. And obviously tonight we're only going to do a tiny little corner because sub-Saharan Africa is so huge, but my guest has covered quite a lot of it in both time and distance. So yeah, I think take a deep breath, because we're going to go on quite a journey and quite an adventure tonight. And I think it is definitely time for you to come and meet my wonderful guest, fantastic storyteller, poet, inspirational coach and facilitator, Philippa Kabali-Kagwa. So please go wild on the chat, put your virtual hands together, and let's see you, Philippa. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being with us. It's an absolute delight to have you here.
No, it's a great, great pleasure and a great, great honor. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So everybody's clapping, of course. So I don't know how many people here you've met. There's a couple of people I think have come because they're your fans and they really want to hear you talk and they want to hear what you have to say. Some people might not have met you before. This is this wonderful, we're still in that opening moment of reaching out across oceans and seas and countries,
Mm.
and finding people who are incredibly well known in their own countries, but not necessarily outside of that sphere. So
Yeah.
you are tonight sitting in Cape Town in
Yes.
South Africa.
Yes.
So an hour ahead of us in the UK. So our times
Mhm.
are very similar. But
Mm.
I have to confess, I know very little about Cape Town and South Africa. I have highlights of history, and I know
Yeah.
that you have wonderful wine, but I don't know what it's like as a place. I don't know what it's like when you look out of your window and what you
Mm.
see, and what you feel when you walk and you feel the ground beneath your feet. Tell us about where you live.
Well, yes. So Cape Town, the southernmost tip of Africa, and I think one of the most complex parts of South Africa in terms of the history of the country. But let's talk about the physical space. Very beautiful. We are close to the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, part of Cape Town has the Atlantic Ocean, and part of it is, well, it's debatable. Some people say the Indian Ocean, some people say it's that place where the Indian and the Atlantic kind of overlap before it becomes the Indian Ocean, if you're going more easterly. So beautiful
Oh no, we've had such great
place to
connection.
come.
Ah, there we go. You're back. We missed you just you
Yeah,
froze just for a moment.
I'm just pray for the gods of the internet that my internet is stable, because it's been doing that this week. I got my son off the PlayStation so that he could be there.
We thank
I'd
him
be
for his
more stable.
sacrifice. I know how difficult that might be, but we got as far as we just got the Indian and the Atlantic Ocean overlapping.
Where they overlap. So beautiful beaches. We've got wine farms. There's the forests at the foot of Table Mountain. So beautiful places for walks. And then it's one of also where the divide between those who have and those who don't have is very, very stark. And the apartheid geography still lives. So the city was built so that closer to the CBD and where things happen was where the historically white suburbs, and the historically black suburbs were further away from town, and people have to travel much further to go to work. So you have those kind of disparities, which I'm 20 something odd years after liberation, independence, of course, they're still not met. So it's a mix of everything. And then, of course, it's the home of jazz. We have most amazing jazz places in the townships and in town. There's Artscape Art and Baxter Theatre. So there's a lot of theatre. Theatrical life and poetry and those kinds of things are quite alive. And in there, we try and insert storytelling. We've been, it's not as popular, but we're kind of trying to plant that seed and get it going. I host the storytelling platform, which has been going for 8 years now. And there are a number of others that maybe model themselves on the moth or things like that sometimes happen. So, it's an interesting place. People come for the Two Oceans Marathon, and then there's the Argus Cycle Tour, where people come from all over the world to run in these beautiful landscapes. So a great mix of life and things. Yeah.
It does. It sounds, beautiful and
Mm.
vibrant, but still, there's still a lot of undercurrents there, really. I mean, and I
Yeah.
guess you get that when you get two oceans meeting, but also when you get different peoples meeting as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we were having a bit of a conversation of going, what do we want to talk about in this hour? You've got this
Yeah.
amazing life that we're just trying to cram into this very short time, and what the
Yeah.
most important questions and what we wanted to concentrate would be. And we were talking about that kind of being in a place of two oceans and two peoples, and being a storyteller who has come from outside, and a storyteller who straddles places. And I think all of us have distinct phases in our lives where we can look back and go, that just feels like a different person, then that was definitely a different time and a different place. And you've kind of done that to extremes. There's been really kind of cut off points where there was the before and after, and there's the Philippa then and the Philippa then and the Philippa then, who live in different worlds and on different sides of big events as well.
Yeah.
And even I think your name is like that. So I've introduced you as Philippa Kabali-Kagwa, but that's almost a nickname, really, isn't it? It's such the shortened version, and kind of your name talks about the different places that you come from and how
Yes.
that you
Well,
bring
I
together.
always say an African child has many names. You have your clan names, and then you get given a name by this auntie and a name by that auntie. And I collect names also. So I embrace that whole thing of, people give you names and you take them and you hold them and they become who you are. So if I were to introduce myself, I would say, and this is not, there's another way, because if I was to introduce myself according to my clan, I would say it differently. But I'm just going to tell you my names. So my names are Philippa Ann Namutebi, Naluoza, Naluoga, Nambuya, Mutua, Muyama, Muihaki, Kabali-Kagwa. And Kabali-Kagwa is all my husband's name. So a good wife, I took the whole surname on.
But it's great you have you have a name that sounds like a poem, and brings those different parts and different elements of your life together, that I think is wonderful. And so I'd love you to talk about that thing of straddling places and straddling times, and kind of where you are in the balance point of all that. And I'll let you take a thread, because I know there's lots of different balance points you'll have to take to us, but I'll let you start because you are just on that balance point and how you want to weigh those up.
So, yeah, so I have lived in many places. When I was 13, I think that was the first time I left Uganda, and I just started high school, and the Archbishop was killed, Luwum, in 1977, and my father had left the country a few months earlier, and he was living in Ethiopia. And I think my parents were planning possibly for us to leave. And then when the Archbishop was killed, my mother and father decided that we would leave. And we were then split up as a family. We're 5 children, and 2 of my siblings had cerebral palsy. So my mom, Faye and Chris and I, and Estella, my second elder sister, ended up in Nairobi. My father was in Ethiopia. My elder sister was in the States for university. And so we were split up as a family for about 4 years. And then when the family moved back to Uganda, I chose to stay in Nairobi because I couldn't imagine. I was about to start my A-levels, and I just couldn't imagine starting a new school for the last 2 years of high school. So I said I'd like to stay in Kenya. And so I stayed in Kenya. And so I would go to school in Kenya and then come back to Kampala. When we lived in Nairobi, we then moved to Addis, and then we were all in Ethiopia. But I'd go to school in Kenya, and then I'd come back to Addis Ababa. And then I finished university in Kenya. I lived there. And then my boyfriend, who became my husband, moved from Uganda to Lesotho. And then I moved to join him because I thought a long distance love affair wasn't going to work. And then we moved to Namibia, and then we moved here. And so at this moment in my life, I think I've lived longest in Cape Town than anywhere in the world.
And does it feel like home now?
Now it does. It took a long time. It took a very long time. But I think part of it was the history of this country. a lot of people say Cape Town can be very lonely, and people say maybe because it's so beautiful, people think about the mountain and people think about the beaches. Um, but for me, it was one of the loneliest places I lived. But then, you have children and they go to school, and you make friends at work, and you make friends with the parents of your children's friends, and um, 30 odd years later, it's home. It's home, And also, I think initially we were on a work permit, and those kinds of things are difficult because every year or every 2 years you have to reapply, and you don't know if they're going to give it to you. And then we got permanent residence, and then we got citizenship, and those processes allow you. It's only when you get permanent residence or when you get citizenship that you realize how you've been living with your feet up here, because you can't allow yourself to root, really, because you don't know if in 2 years' time you might not get your work permit or something. But once you get permanent residence and things like that, there's just a sense of more stability and an allowing in your soul to kind of just make home, as it were. Yeah.
But it sounds as well like you had very deep roots in Uganda, and I think maybe when you've been uprooted, when you don't expect to be uprooted, and you can be quite tentative about allowing yourself to grow those roots again.
Yeah.
Because that, it sounded like it can be a painful process to be uprooted, and then you can never be quite as settled because that possibility is there. And yeah, so you go.
Now, I was going to say, I think Uganda will always be home. I think there are three places I think of as home: Uganda and Kenya and Cape Town. Nairobi, Kampala, Nairobi, and Cape Town. And I think when I moved to Kenya, it took me a while to root. But I joined the choir, and the choir became my home. And through the choir, and then I had, it's high school. It's where you make your friends, where there's something about adolescence and the friends you make, I think, in that time. And I went to university there. And so I really began to root. And my first job was in Nairobi. So it was, again, a place where I was beginning to root. And I had friends who had seen me grow. We had grown up together in some ways. We're still there. I still have a lot of friends. In fact, Mshai is online, and Mshai is my little sister who feels sometimes like a big sister because she's so wise. But yeah, so I have some really good friends. So Kenya really was a place where I really, in the end, felt at home. I really felt like I grew and I flourished. I sang, I made friends, and it just has a really special place in my heart. Yeah.
And through all of those places, it feels like there has been a thread of words in all of those celebratory forms. So song became the thing in Kenya, and choir.
Yeah.
But from your parents, so your mother was a folklorist and your father was a poet, and
Yeah.
so you've come back home, I think, in that way as well. I think sometimes it's tempting to go, oh no, I don't want to do what my parents do.
Yeah.
but that must have influenced you.
Yeah, my mom was a teacher and a storyteller, and then she started to do a master's in oral literature. My dad was actually a civil servant, but a poet as well, and it was so interesting because they would tell us stories, and we would hold concerts when we were kids for them. It was just a thing we did. And it was so funny when I had my children and we went to Uganda once, and there was load shedding, when the electricity would go off, and my nieces who were growing up in my parents' home would then have concerts. And I was like, oh my goodness, look at this tradition. And then there was reading. My parents read a lot. My mom read a lot. And like when I was in high school, when we lived in Ethiopia, we would share books. You know, my dad would read a book and give it to my mom to read, and my mom would give it to me, and then we would talk about it. So reading and writing and, yeah, words. And then when I was in high school also, I started journaling. I didn't know it was journaling, but I'd have this little book where I'd write poems or I'd write, and it became a place where I would process, make sense of my life. Sometimes when you live in a strange place, you have no one to talk to. And writing became a place where I could go and just make sense of my life. And then books also. I mean, Women Who Run with the Wolves sat on my bedside table. I was so excited when I found that book because there were stories and she was making sense of life with these folk tales, you know, and I was like, it was like eating sweets. And it was a time when I really needed someone to talk to, but I didn't really have anyone to talk to in Cape Town. And that book was on my bedside table for about 3-4 years. And in that period, so many of my friends got that book as a birthday present, as a Christmas present, as a, have you read this kind of present?
Shai, I'm
Yeah.
expecting that you have one of these on your shelf.
I have two, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure Shai does. And I have it on mine. And I think that we were talking earlier about that thing of it does give a different way into how stories just connect with your mind. And we were talking about some of the stories that kind of you might be worried about telling them because they feel sexist or they feel wrong, and there's kind of stereotypes in there that you don't look at. But you were saying about that thing of being very Jungian and different parts of you that actually there's sometimes they're difficult stories to tell, but we need to have them because actually you need to hear them at the right time. And certainly I used to have nightmares until I read Women Who Run with the Wolves. I used to have the stalker dream, and and she talks about that of kind of that of having that stalker of the person who's behind you, and that part of you that's always trying to bring you down. That's always
Yeah.
that voice in your head that's going, no, you who do you think you are? That is the the voice of the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I read that story and I read her essay, and those dreams stopped. It was amazing. It was literally clicked and was overnight. And you were saying that about some of the stories as well, that it kind of had a similar effect on you.
So for me, The Ugly Duckling has always been for me like one of my favorites. I think I could relate to The Ugly Duckling, you know, being the insider outsider. I was a gawky child. I fit in and I didn't because and I remember I used to listen to it. You know, we had a record by Danny Kaye. And you know, so I loved, there once was an ugly duckling with feathers all stubby and brown, and the other birds in so many words said, get out of town, get out, get out, get out of town. Anyway, so I loved that story, and I remember reading it in Women Who Run with the Wolves, and just her saying that when the duckling became a swan, that sometimes we grow up in a place where we don't quite fit, but then we find our tribe. And we find it might not be your family, it might be, I don't know, the choir, or it might be the storytellers. And when you find your tribe, just how wonderful that was. And I think that for me was like, yeah, you can, that's how stories work. They're medicine in that way. And yeah, so.
So when did you get the confidence and the idea to go out telling stories as medicine, and to go out and go, I think you need to listen to these stories, and I actually want to tell stories as well as being an author and a poet on the page. I'm going to tell stories and start to look at kind of the African tales, the Ugandan stories that you heard, as well as the European ones like the Ugly Duckling. How did those come together?
So I think I've always kind of told stories. Like when I was a teacher, I would use stories, but I never thought of myself as a storyteller. But I would find moments. So when I facilitated organization development process in schools and planning sessions, I'd sometimes use stories to explain a concept, or you're working with an organization and the relationships are so fraught and you want to talk about them, but you don't know how to talk about them. So I'd get a folk tale or something and use that as a way in. So that was something I always did and didn't think about it as I am a storyteller. People who knew me in Nairobi knew me as a singer. I would sing, I would perform in choirs. And I think when I came to Cape Town, I didn't quite, even though it's a very musical place, for some reason, I never really found a choir. I think, my children were young and my husband was studying, and it was a strange place. And so I started writing. I went more into writing, and then I started doing more storytelling. But I didn't call myself a storyteller because we were always told, get a proper job and then do your art. Your art was always the hobby. So I struggled with that. I wrestled with that. And then but I don't know, there was a year, probably when I hit the 2000s, when I was in my 40s or tending to my 40s or something. There was this thing, I kept writing poetry about you must sing, you must dance, you must tell stories. Every poem seemed to be talking about that. And then I heard about Sue Hollingsworth, who was running this course here in Cape Town. She was with the International School of Storytelling. And so Sue and Ashley Ramsden, they came down. And even to gift myself that, I met Sue, I connected with her, I knew I needed to do the course. But I did not commit to the course until the day before the course. Or was it the day the course started? She was waiting for me and I arrived and I handed her my check and I said, here, I am going to do this thing. And she said, I've been keeping this place for you because intuitively I felt you were coming. And so it was 2012 that I really started to become comfortable with calling myself a storyteller, but people called me a storyteller before that, if you get what I mean, because I would do it anyway. But for me to give myself 5 weeks and just step into storytelling and then really look for ways to tell stories. And I also wrestled with it because I felt as if a lot of people I talked to did storytelling with children, but I didn't necessarily work with children. I worked with organizations. And I wanted to tell adult stories because I felt that the adults needed to hear the story. So after I did two courses with Sue and Ashley, and in 2014 we decided to start the Story Club Cape Town. And I had been calling myself artist, and then I began to say I'm a storyteller, and I'm growing into it. Someone told me, when you're old, it's so much better to be an older storyteller because you've lived life and so maybe that's kind of giving me more comfort in saying I'm a storyteller.
I think that's really true, and I mean, from the what I've heard you tell, and also, I mean, because you've had such quite an amazing life, I'm just going to wave this around. So this is the most incredible memoir. So I'm still sort of it's quite full on. So I'm reading a little bit at a time. But we were talking about that leaving Uganda and everything that is happening in the world at the moment. Obviously, I've got my blue and yellow colours behind and sort of standing in solidarity for different stories that are told to people. And at the moment, once again, it's kind of we're being told a certain story about what's been going on, and
Yeah.
we know that the Russian people are being told an entirely different story, and
Mm.
we're completely convinced that what we're being told is right,
Yeah.
and maybe it is, and that what the Russians have been doing is completely wrong, and I suspect
Mm.
that is also true. But you don't entirely know, because you have to be aware that these are very powerful stories that are being told. And you were sort of talking about that other time. I was talking about, how lucky I'm so lucky. I've never had to live through anything like that. I live in a very comfortable, very cozy corner of England.
Mm.
And I think that in England, stories are seen as being quite cozy. I mean, certainly by the majority population
Mm.
stories are for children, and maybe, you know, when you've got enough time to sort of sit and chill, and it's just it's a nice sort of, you know, middle classy cozy thing to do. And as
Mm,
storytellers, I think we rebel against that a little bit, and actually we want to be telling the adult stories and the stories with meat. But I think in other cultures it's not like that, because stories are absolutely essential, and when you have to leave, sometimes a story is all that you could take with you.
mm,
And like finding those stories, in Women Who Run with the Wolves, you find the right story and it is like medicine.
mm,
And I think if you have those stories and you are able to pass them on, there is so much medicine that you're able to give. If you find the right person at the right time, you can change the course of somebody's life, like that book did for you. And I think that your book is doing similar things. And
mm.
so I think you're in a much better place to be in, you know, an older person with that life experience, telling those really meaty stories, and those stories that are
Mm.
hard to hear.
Yeah,
But actually they're healing in the hardness.
yeah.
Um so I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit of a story, or about one of those stories, or even just one of your poems, because the poems and stories just slide in and out of each other when you tell, and I don't know if other people have heard you tell so much.
Mm. Um, so I could tell you some poems because then they're short. Then maybe I could sneak one or two
Would love that.
because I'd like to give you. I grew up in Uganda, so this is from my. Sorry, I'm trying to read. So this is from my. I grew up in Uganda in the '60s and '70s, and so I want to read this poem. It's at quite at the beginning, and it's called The Extravaganza, because it gives you a sense of me and my cousins and my sisters telling a poem, and because I don't think anybody can ever read it the way I hear it in my head when I write it, when I wrote it. It's about the concerts we used to have. The adults sit upright on dining room chairs in sitting room turned concert hall. The staircase, a dark wooden backdrop to the stage. Someone welcomes them. Item number 1. All the children singing and dancing Nora's Indian song. Moga wali mali mali, moga wali mali, eva palit, chakara chakara, sugary shari. Foreign words that were probably incorrect. Hand and leg movements imperfect. Faces beaming. Next song, Joyce's song, choir in place, hands together and sequendera, sequendera, sipiriti, sipiriti, sequendera, sequendera, oh sipiriti, oh sipiriti, oh sipiriti. The parents clap, the performers move on with glee to the finale, the Bakisimba dance. White enamel basin, now a throbbing drum. Olunkutiza, 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 olukutwala mbakusimba, bukutupu, bukutupu. Dancers in line, sweaters on hips, the singers start. Tweyanze, tweyanze, walalala kakwetema bamwongere chupa nabulagala. Tweyanze, tweyanze, walalala kakwetema bamwongere chupa nabulagala. The dancers march in, kneel down. Clasped hands move left, move right, and then they stand, hips swivel this way and that, feet stepping steady to the beat, singing, dancing, ululating. The audience joins in. The bass and drum climaxes. Tu-tu-tu, tu-tu-tu-tu, tu-tu-tu, tu-tu-tu-tu, tu-tu-tu-tu-tu-tu. The concert ends, eyes shining, the hat is passed round, the sweet promise of tomorrow. So that was one of our concerts. I must have been about 6 or 7. And then a few years later, when I was 6, 7, Idi Amin came into power. And so Some of you might know that era in Uganda. And if you don't, you can research it or just buy my book. I'm just going to read you a poem about, it's called Velvet Skies, and it was about how, in those days, people started to disappear. People would disappear, they'd be taken by the secret police, we wouldn't know where they were. And one day, the same thing happened to my father. 11 years old, and afraid we have lost my father forever. 3 days ago, he was taken from his office to Naguru. Nsubuga came home driving like a maniac. He told Mama. And now the house is full of people that we keep serving tea. Are they mourning him? Are they praying? Are they planning ways to bring him back? My heart is heavy. Many others have been taken and never returned. I retreat to the only place I can be alone, the bathroom. As I run the bath, I remember Mama saying calmly on that first day, "Your father has been taken, but don't worry, we will be all right." I believe her. She was later allowed to visit him, and when she returned, she said, "Your father said he loves you. No matter what happens, you must walk tall with your head held up high. He has done nothing wrong." Tears roll down my face. The comforting warmth of the water enfolds me. I stare at the velvety skies through the frosted glass window. Light blue, deeper blue, purply blue. It's dusk. God made this time specially. God, I speak in our special time alone. God, let Daddy come home today. I'm praying for all of us, Maliza, Mama, Estella, Faye, Chris, and me. Finished, I look up. The sky is now black, and my fingers old and wrinkled. I slip on my pajamas, walking down the stairs, headlights sweep into the driveway. I hear the pounding in my chest as I peer through the French windows. A white Datsun with UVS number plates stops in front of the house. The car doors open, and out he steps. "Daddy!" I scream, and I start to let him in. Behind him, a dark man follows. "Shh," say the adults as they push me away. I don't know their fear, but many have been returned only to be taken again or killed at the door. "Daddy," I say, squeezing past them and hugging him. We're wrapped in velvety skies. The man in the shadows looks on. "You're happy to see your daddy?" he asks. Silently, we walk into the house and lock the doors. Daddy is back. Black turns back to velvet.
Beautiful, but hard. Yeah, again, it's the hard and the healing, isn't it? And we know it's happening again. But you've had really positive experiences with your poetry and responses, haven't you?
Positive from other people.
Yeah.
I found, what was so powerful for me, there's been many different instances, but for example, young Ugandans who were born, let's say in the 1980s and later, many of them came to me and they said, "Thank you for writing your book, because our parents' generation and our grandparents, they don't talk about what happened. They talk about how when President Museveni came into power, he brought peace. And when we say, well, what happened before that? And they say, we don't talk about those things, or they change the subject. And they said, just some of them said, "Oh, those things actually happened." It's true. It's not hearsay, but some of them also said, "Now I have something that I can go and talk to my parents about." A lot of older people now have written books. In the last few years, I know of a couple of people who have written their books and so on. But I think it enabled a conversation. And one of the things I learned is by telling something that is very, very personal, it becomes quite universal. So one book launch, I was in Johannesburg, and I read that poem, Velvet Skies, and there was a woman from Colombia, and she stood up and she said, "When I was 5, my mother was taken by the secret police because she was an activist." And it was exactly the same. And she said, "Listening to you tell that story, you could have been talking about my life." And I found the most unexpected people come up to you and say, "This is my life," or "This particular thing you spoke about, I know that thing." Yeah, and that's one of the things that I have found to be really, really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is just incredibly powerful. And
Mm,
and I suppose that's the thing, is you still think of Uganda as being home.
mm,
But have you been back? I mean, my assumption is, and this is, we were
mm.
sort of in that, in all of those stories about home, is it possible to go home? Because is your home the Uganda before your father was taken? Can it ever be the same?
Home,
Has home gone?
no, home is home. I try with the children, especially with the older children. We used to try and go back to Uganda every 2 years. I think it's changed a bit after my father died, and things have changed. But I still go home. I mean, I was home in 2020. I was, you like 2 years ago, last, but COVID kind of has gotten in the way. And like my eldest child, my daughter, she used to love going to Uganda. And there came a point when she was in university and she would save up her pocket money, because there was a year she wanted to go and we didn't go because we said we're broke, we can't go. And she found a part-time job and she worked, because she said, "Next Christmas I'm going to Uganda, whether you guys are going or not, and I'm saving money to go home." And we've spoken about it, because she said initially when we used to take them, they used to wonder why we go home, because after the war, there were lots of potholes and a lot of things that weren't fixed. And when you go from Cape Town, which is quite modern, to Kampala, there's a lot of traffic and dust, and they didn't like that. But then what she really liked was, in spite of all of that, she said, I'd walk into a room and people would say, "Are you Philippa's child?" Or, like people would recognize me and I would fit, "Are you Victor's daughter? Are you?" And people would start telling me about my grandparents or whatever. And it wasn't just the 4 of us or the 5 of us. We belonged to many, many, many people. And I didn't have to explain myself like she said, I didn't have to explain myself like I did in Cape Town. I just belonged. I just, and there's that, when I land in Entebbe, something in my spirit says I'm home. But when I go to Nairobi, something in my spirit tells me I'm home. And then I've been away too long. I long to come back to Cape Town. And when I see the mountain as I'm landing and the sea, I also feel at home, but in a different kind of way, and all of these places are home. And I think home for me is also people. Relationships, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the same as for me. True is for me is that people definitely become home, but also landscapes. And
Mm-hmm.
and the way for me, I mean, and for me, getting to know a landscape is always through story. But you've taken, I mean, like, so, I'm going to sort of skip I don't know. I don't know if it is going to be a big skipping topic or not, really, because they might really just intertwine. So many people will know that I studied with a man called Duncan Williamson, and I got given this
Mm,
amazing archive with lots of stories and lots of recordings of him from before
mm,
I knew him, so that I had this amazing time of having studied with him as a young woman and him being an old man. When I heard the stories, we were both kind of the same age, and there was this other relationship, and so I'm
mm,
really fascinated because we haven't had a chance to talk about this, but I know that your mother was a
mm,
folklorist,
mm,
and she recorded lots of people in Uganda collecting folk stories, and then you
mm,
discovered this treasure trove.
mm.
So it's not complete and the recordings are gone, but you've got all of these transcriptions of conversations and stories, and the nerdy bit, the really nerdy storytelling bit of me just goes, oh, please tell me about that. I want to know about that. It sounds really exciting.
Yeah, so it isn't as big as you've imagined it to be, but it is, she was my mother. She was one of the first, I must tell you this, she was one of the first women in Uganda to go to university. But in those days, women were encouraged to do diplomas and not degrees, and she didn't have the money to register for a degree, so she did a diploma, and then when I was about 3 or 4, she went back to do a degree. And then she decided to do a master's, and she did it in oral literature. And so I remember as a child, mommy going away on field trips, and I remember one particular time I went with her on a field trip, and I remember walking up in the mountains where she comes from in eastern Uganda, Mount Elgon, Mount Masaba. That's our name for it, the real name. Mount Elgon is the name which is on the map, and she recorded a lot of things, music and stories and poems, and her language is different from my father's. She made sure we learned my father's language, Luganda, but her language is Lumasaba. And so I remember learning some of those poems, which I've forgotten. Like there was one, Natia, 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 Natuye Hutuyu, Ni Babana Wewe, Yasha Busima Wewe, Yalo Mandi Nushe, Natia, 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 Wanu Kangashina. I learned some of those things. And she transcribed them. She hadn't finished her master's, and then we had to leave the country, and she couldn't leave with the cassettes and the reel to reels because they might think that she was taking seditious material out of the country. And there was a family friend who she left her tapes with, because this friend of hers knew people who worked with the United Nations. And so she thought maybe they could slowly smuggle them out of the country. But I think her children got hold of them and recorded over them. Anyway, they were lost. And then my mom so she had these thick books, and I don't have all of that material. I need to actually check if some of it is still at home. But at some point she had gotten someone to help her digitize, start typing it onto the computer. So I managed to get some of that material from him, and I'm slowly working through some of the stories. And the thing is, some of the stories are told and it feels like they're just the bones of the story, and so you feel like you've got to give it some body. And because I've lived in and out of Uganda, I'm trying to live myself into some of those stories, and it's that thing again of straddling, where I feel like these stories make sense to me, but maybe I miss some of these things, but maybe it's okay for me to put my flavor into how I tell that story. So I've been working with that. And then I have one story that my father wrote in Luganda, and I've recorded it for myself just to really begin to understand it. I know it in Luganda, but because I've lived most of my life in places where I have to talk in English, my reading of Luganda is not so good. So I've been practicing how to say it in Luganda. And then when it's inside my bones, because some, you know that some stories take a long time to settle. And this is a written story, so it's complex. And if I have to tell it, I think I'll have to break it down into parts rather than tell it as it is as a written thing, because it becomes too much even for people to listen. So I'm working with that as well in Luganda, and hopefully I'll tell it one day in Luganda, and maybe I'll translate it as well, or I will do what we sometimes do, mix the languages, because we can. Yeah.
I think it's beautiful when languages are mixed, and
Yeah.
I mean, I'm monolingual, as many English people are, because
Mhm.
our language provision is appalling. And as a country, I think we have a very bad attitude to language, and we don't teach children young enough.
Mm.
But I love the rhythm and the feel of different languages,
Mm.
and I think it's really good for all of us to hear those different
Mm.
rhythms and accents and ways of playing with words, and
Yeah.
different, you can still feel the joy and the rhyming and the patterns, even if you don't understand what the words are. And I think that's really a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to be involved with, and I think that as a monolinguist I need to hear that probably even more.
Mm.
And when you understand both languages, I assume it's even more fun.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, one understands language. And yeah, I mean, it was so interesting listening to you and Tamar talk about language, because how people talk about Welsh language is, when they talk about how oppressed Welsh was, that's how it was for us because of the colonial experience. We even grew up in high school and you could get in trouble for speaking your home language. But then you know certain things, and I suddenly want to tell you this story, because I think things we lost a lot during the colonial experience. But I think, and because I've traveled a lot, I think I've picked up a lot of things from many different places, and things sit in you as little fragments. And sometimes you have to just believe that in that fragment is the whole thing, and the whole is in the parts, and the parts are in the whole. But one thing, when my mom was doing her research, I was really interested in games and songs and things. And in school, we had this club called the African Music Club. I was in primary school then, and I joined it. And this guy came and he was teaching us dances. And one of the dances he taught us was a funeral dance. And it was a dance danced by the women in my mom's ethnic group, the Bamasaba. They danced funeral dance, and they played. The drum was a pot, and so it wasn't. And they'd get a wad of banana fiber and they would hit it, and then they'd use their elbows as well. And I don't remember the song, and I don't remember the dance, but I do remember running, being so moved, and going home and telling mom how the Bamasaba dance when someone dies and how amazing it was. And then many years later, my sister wrote a poem about being at my grandmother's funeral and seeing an old woman dancing, and that awakened something inside me. And then my mother died in 2012, and I remember at her funeral wanting to dance, but nobody, I even couldn't ask anybody. I didn't ask anybody if they knew the dance, because I think we are very Christian. We're all very Christian. And I think in the Christian culture, one of the things, a lot of our things were seen as not good. I mean, it's interesting. I go to Uganda now and people sing traditional songs and dance in church. When I was growing up, we couldn't do that because those things were seen as not Christian. So I couldn't dance. I still maybe want to dance this farewell to my mother. But so I've been carrying this fragment of this funeral dance and knowing I want to do something with it. And then in 2018, we were in Durban and Inamhlope, this well-known South African storyteller. She's just an amazing woman. She has this festival that she runs, and it was the 10th annual Nozincwadi Storytelling Festival. And Mushai was there from Kenya. And Mushai told a story of Mekatilili, who was a Giriama woman, grandmother. This is a true story, who became a freedom fighter when she became a grandmother. So, there's still time for us to become amazing things. But anyway, and she used to use the Giriama had a funeral dance called the Chifutu dance, and she would use the Chifutu dance to gather people and then to talk about what was happening with the colonial powers and how they could fight. And I was so excited by that story, because I think some stories I think if a story stirs something in you, that's the story you were meant to hear. And I still want to tell that story. I need to talk to Mshai and practice it and so on. But the thing of that fragment of it for me ties the experience of my mom doing her oral literature research, and then this gentleman coming to teach us this amazing dance, and then my sister telling this amazing story. And there was a gentleman there, Eugene Skiff, who's a beautiful musician, and he plays percussion, and he was playing water drums. And so it was just all of these things tied together. And I don't know where that thing is going to take me, because it's 4 years later and I'm still excited when I remember that time. But something about those fragments are going to come together one day and become something. And it might just be a very personal thing, or it might be something I do out there in the world. I don't know, but stories are medicine.
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, stories are medicine, and some are instant, and some you need to sit with, I think, for a lifetime. And I knew this hour would just go ridiculously fast, and we have all very, very nearly come to the end of an hour. Obviously, taking the tradition on is an ish hour. It's my thing. I do this because I'm very selfish, and because there are conversations that I want to have and people that I want to talk to, and conversations that I think need to happen. So we can go over a little bit, but I'm going to ask you to think, to see if there's anything that you really wanted to say before the end, though I think finishing with stories and medicine is a wonderful place to pause. Everybody's just been listening very intently and not really saying anything on the chat, but this is your time. If you have any burning questions for Philippa, this is your time to ask. Norman quite early on was asking, if you didn't see yourself as a storyteller, what did being a storyteller mean to you, when you were younger, if you didn't see you as a storyteller?
I've been reflecting on that, just even calling myself an artist. Oh, look, Norman's on. Anyway, sorry. When I took when I became let me start again. I was in high school. I did okay, and so I was encouraged to be a scientist. So for my A levels, I did biology, chemistry, maths, and music. And then I hated maths, and it was hard, and my maths teacher ignored me, and I was confused, and I didn't know, when we started doing, I don't know, it was difficult. Maths was really difficult. And so I dropped maths at the end of my Form 5, and I told the headmistress and I told everybody, I'm not doing maths, I'm going to do biology, chemistry, and science. And biology, chemistry, and music. So I finished my A levels, and I wasn't a scientist and I wasn't an artist. And so how was I going to go to university? Because I didn't fit in. And I really wanted to do music, but people would ask me, so what are you going to do? And I ended up going to university and studying music and education, because then I could become a teacher. And that gave me permission to be an artist. And around that time, my eldest sister had done graphic design and she'd gone back to Uganda, and it was in the 80s, and we had just gone through a civil war. And so it was really hard for her to find proper work because there wasn't really work for graphic designers. And so I was looking at my sister, who was an artist, and thinking she's struggling to get work, proper work. And I want to be a musician. How can that be a thing? You know what I mean? And so I've always, my heart, I'm an artist, but the world around me has never told me really to be an artist, not completely. When I finished my A levels, I had a gap year, and I was at Makerere University, and I could only get in as what they called an occasional student. So I could attend, and I went to the Department of Music, Dance and Drama, and I could attend, but I couldn't, I wasn't going to get any credit because I didn't have 3 A levels in the arts. And so I was really enjoying, but I didn't take it as seriously maybe as I could have, because they didn't want to acknowledge me. And so I've found that many times when I've stepped into my artist space, the world hasn't seen it as powerful, but when I've stepped fully in it, they've acknowledged that I am powerful in that space. But it's not powerful. Do you get what I mean? And so I'm growing into saying it really doesn't matter what the world thinks. I know that when I step into this place with honesty and conviction, I have an impact. And I am learning and relearning that that's what I need to do, that I need to give myself permission. And I need to step into that place because it is my work. And the world I live in might not honor it, or might not, they'll say, come and do it for free or whatever. And I need to find ways to work with that and either tell people you must pay me, or so I don't know. Do you know what I mean? But it's growing into me honoring it and me believing in it and me putting it out there as something beautiful and strong and powerful. And that's the work I have to do for myself. And then, so that's the long answer to that question, but it is such a deep question and such an important question. And I am working on it right now because I'm learning
I have so many things that I want to say back to that. I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to say that I think all true
just before you say that, can I just say hello, Elsa? My niece is on. So hi, Elsa. Now you can talk to me.
Hello, Elsa, and welcome. I think all artists struggle to be recognised by the people around them, all true artists, because I think artists are visionary and they're challenging the world around them, and to have an impact, they have to be slightly out of sync with the rest of the world. But I think that if you can find that, if you can honour what's inside you, and when, like you say, when you are strong in that, other people can't help but take notice of that, and they will reflect that back at you. And you are in a room here with people who are honouring you, who are acknowledging you as a storyteller, who have come because they believe in you as an artist. And we've been talking about all of the foundation and the layers that make up the base to stand on, where you can sing, where you can tell, where you can share what you've been working on. And I'm just going to remind everybody that you have heard some of Philippa's own stories and you've heard some of her poetry, but you can see her less conversationally and more performance-wise on Thursday, when she's really strutting her stuff as an artist in performance rather than an artist being very vulnerable and being very open. So I really thank you for your openness and your vulnerability tonight. So yes, on Thursday, the Get a Words in Edgeways concert, all you need to do is go to www.getawordsinedgeways.co.uk. I will put that up on YouTube afterwards, and it will be on my website and my Facebook. So if you just look at Amy Douglas, you'll find that. I suspect you'll find it Philippa as well. Norman, I'm so pleased you want to listen to it all again, and you can, because it will be up. It will be up on Taking the Tradition on. I will top and tail it over the next few days, but it will be here with the little bits at the beginning and the end that just haven't been edited. But straight away, I will tidy it up. And there's lots of other. If you've enjoyed this conversation, there are lots of other conversations there as well, and they do start to tie in and have themes running through. So Philippa was talking about Tamar and about language, and that she listened to that before coming here, and that's maybe influenced some of her answers, and certainly that last conversation with Tamar has really impacted on me in the way that I look at things. And this series is really developing me as an artist and making me question and making me change and opening doors inside my head. So they're all free. They're all just up on Taking the Tradition on. Go and explore, and when you have some time. The conversations are always free. However, if you would like to become a patron, it's a place where we can chat about things and what we've heard on the different conversations, and you'll always find out who is going to be my next artist first. I've got somebody very, very exciting for next month, which is already up on the patron site. It will be out, and there's a Facebook event. You'll only have to wait a couple of days, but if you can't wait, become a patron. And Taking the Tradition on is the first Tuesday of every month, so we will be back here. It is all free tonight. That's what you could do to support me if you have the means to do so and you want to. If you want to support Philippa and support yourself, I'm just going to thoroughly recommend investing in Flame and Song, Philippa's memoir. It's a wonderful, beautiful, challenging, inspiring read. The only thing that would make it better would be to have it as an audiobook. So I'm trying to encourage Philippa to set up a crowdfunding site so that she can actually record it, because I would love to hear this in your actual voice rather than just your written voice. I would love to be able to have both. There's been lots of lovely comments. Just everybody is really honouring you, Philippa, and thank you for your vulnerability and talking about loneliness and your openness. As ever with these conversations, it feels like it's a start rather than an end. There's only so much you can do in an hour, and everybody sort of tells me, "Oh, an hour's a terribly long time online," but I feel you need at least an hour to get into anything and to have the meat that I crave. I get a little bit fed up with the shallow surface topping of things. Cecilia, I will definitely let you know if the audiobook crowdfunding happens. I am going to carry on nagging, and if Philippa does decide to do it, I'm going to tell the world. So yes, you'll definitely hear about it from me.
Thank you, Amy. I will hold you to that. To remind me.
So the only other thing I'm going to say is, if you are wanting to get the written copy, the best place to get it from is the African Books Collective, and then the money goes to the right kind of people that we want to support, rather than people who are spending fortunes in depositing lots of trash in outer space. So that would be my recommendation. But for now, thank you all for coming, for your wonderful ears, for your fantastic comments, and for your listening. And most of all, thank you very much to Philippa Kabali-Kagwa for just being an inspirational, vulnerable, open, wonderful guest. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for hosting such a beautiful space. I've played on your YouTube channel, and it's a wonderful space, and you hold it so beautifully. So thank you.
Well, it's a space that we create together, and I think that's the thing. Like stories, we need each other to be a community and to hold this space, and nobody can do it on their own. We need to come together and meet in the middle. So
Yeah.
It's a joint effort. But
Yeah.
for now, wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good night. Go well, keep safe, and go
Mm.
in peace.